Hey everybody, just a real quick what is truth here. I happened to find a little bit of time to sneak one in, let everybody know that I didn't abandon this project after the first episode. I think I made reference to it on the last show, but our family's been living in France for the last year learning French, and we're about to transition to our destination of Cameroon. So things have been a little busy right now and haven't had a lot of time to be doing these videos, but we've got a little bit of time here. What I want to do is just review a real short video that I saw that was put out by the apparently the Muslim Apologetics podcast, which I discovered on YouTube. And they're going to be talking a little bit about, it's a claim that the incarnation of Jesus requires that God not be immutable. So they're saying there's a contradiction in Christian doctrine between the immutability of God in the incarnation, in which Jesus takes on a human nature. And so we'll see what they had to say, and then I'll have a few comments to make about that, and that'll be it for this episode. So let's get them started.
Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome everybody to another episode of MAP, Muslim Apologetics Podcast. I'm your host today, Abu Ayyub, and today we have Ijaz Ahmed that will be talking to us about the nature of God in Christianity. So take it away, Ijaz.
Walaikum assalam. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Brother Abu Ayyub. So today, inshallah, we'll be discussing a very essential topic when it comes to dawah and apologetics. It's the topic of the nature of God in Christianity. And when you discuss the topic of the nature of God, this is actually a field of study called ontology. And you spell it O-N-T-O-L-O-G-Y, ontology. It just simply means the nature of God's existence, the nature of being. And what we're looking to discuss is the asma wa sifa of God, basically. So in Christianity, there are two key verses that we need to look at. The first verse is in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8. It says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. And the second passage comes from Psalms. So it's in Psalm 102, verse 27. It says, but you, O Lord, remain the same, and your years will never end. What these two passages teach is that God is eternal. He's basically perfect. He does not need to be changed in any way. And naturally, there are two areas of difficulty when approaching this topic of ontology. Whether God is immutable, that means can he change or not change, and impassible, meaning can he suffer or not suffer. So immutable means he does not change, and impassible means that he does not suffer. In the case of Christianity, God actually is mutable or changeable. So these two verses are a core contradiction in their theology, more specifically in their Christology. Now, you might be asking yourselves, well, in what way did God change? How is he not the same? Well, here's the problem. These verses teach that God is eternal, he does not change, he is the same as he has always been and as he always will be. But the problem here is that we are also taught that Jesus took on a human nature. So the person of Christ, which is the divine being, took on a human nature. So necessarily the divine being, which is Jesus the Christ, changed. The person of God changed. His very nature changed because his nature excluded the human nature and then it involved the human nature. That teaches us that these two passages are a major contradiction. And what we don't find is Muslims using these passages because they point to two things. The first problem is whoever wrote these documents, more specifically Hebrews, they were not aware that the nature of God changed and that Christ assumed a human nature. He took on a human nature to himself. He necessarily changed when he did that. So either the Holy Spirit, allegedly, when educating or inspiring this scribe, they made a very big mistake. Or it's simply a product of human imagination and it's simply a contradiction Or thirdly, maybe both are correct, but that would then mean that either Jesus is wrong, his nature is wrong, or that the Bible itself is wrong. So this is actually a major inconsistency. We're trying to ask ourselves, how can he be the same yesterday as he is today if yesterday he did not have a human nature? So that's a very big contradiction. And this contradiction moves us into another discussion as well, a similar discussion. The problem we now have is that if God is incarnate and his very nature changes, it means two things. One, that the human nature becomes deified, and that the deity becomes humanized. So either way you look at this topic, it's a big problem for Christianity. Either the Bible is wrong, Jesus' nature is false, or both are wrong, which is the most probable case, because logically they both can't be correct at the same time. So this was our 5-minute discussion on the nature of God in Christianity. Again, the topic is called the ontology of God in Christianity, and I encourage Muslims to study this topic just a little bit more. Assalamu alaikum.
All right, so there you have the case brought to us by Ijaz Ahmad. One of the first things I want to point out is that a lot of times you will hear from Muslims that the deity of Jesus Christ is not a doctrine that comes from the New Testament, and they will go there to try and argue that Jesus in the New Testament is just a man, he's just a prophet. And Ijaz brought up a great verse which he used correctly to show that Jesus Christ is in fact presented as God in the New Testament, Hebrews 13:8, saying that Jesus himself does not change, which is an attribute of God. There is no created being who can say, I am always the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so the author of Hebrews is making it quite clear that he sees Jesus as divine there. The question as to whether God has to change in the Incarnation, did the nature of God change? What we need to ask ourselves is, what is the difference between God changing and God acting? Now, Christians and Muslims both assert that God does act in time. He does a different thing yesterday from the thing that he did today. One day he didn't create the world, and the next day he did. And there was the world that he had made. And he sent prophets at various times and sent revelation at various times. And there's going to be a certain day on which he's going to judge the world. And so God has activities, things that he does, which must not be changes in his essential nature. And I think we can see what the difference is there. So we're hearing that in order for Jesus, for the Son, the second person of the Trinity, to take on a human nature, that has to be a change in the Godhead, but that's exactly what Christians deny. We say that it's not a change in God's nature. This is something that the divine nature, this is something God is doing. This is an activity in space and time. And so what we specifically say is not that a human being got mixed into the nature of God, but we say that the second person of the Trinity, having a complete divine nature, added to that complete human nature. And so Jesus is one person with two natures. And we heard that if you have that, you have to have the divinity becomes humanized and the humanity becomes deified. But that's exactly what we contradict. You have complete distinction between the two natures. They're not mixed. They're not averaged out in any way. And where does this come from, right? This comes from exactly what the New Testament teaches. You read the Gospels and you see Jesus doing things, being born, growing, eating, sleeping, learning, dying. These are things that God cannot do. They are not activities of the divine nature. And so we see from that Jesus has a complete, fully formed human nature. You also see him doing things like forgiving people's sins, having authority over nature, demons, sicknesses. You see that he teaches with authority equal to that of the law. You see him making claims that he existed before his birth, before Abraham, in fact, that he was with the Father in glory before the world was made. Well, those are things that are not human activities. No person can do those things, and those are the activity of the divine nature of Jesus. So one person with two natures that are distinct, a 100% pure divine nature and a 100% pure human nature, and so the divine nature doesn't change. It's exactly the same way that it always has been, and that's the part that was getting confused there. If you follow the language, he started to say it the right way, saying that added a human nature, but then he said, so the person of Jesus, then the divinity gets changed, and that's where the terms got confused. Now, admittedly, this is a difficult concept. I'm not going to say that this is a very simple thing, right? To say, okay, you've got a Godhead, which is one being made up of three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and then you take the second person there, and you say that he's going to add to himself a human nature, so now you have one person with two natures. These things are not easily, or I would say really at all, completely comprehensible to a human mind. And I think a lot of Muslims, especially right here, just go, our God is simple, and you guys have gotten caught up in these difficulties because you wanted to worship Jesus or something like that. And the question I want to, realistically speaking, if you're going to talk about a being who has no needs, has always existed, created everything, exists outside of time, sees everything, knows everything, you're already talking about a being that's incomprehensible to the human mind. And when you look at man-made deities, you find that they're very comprehensible. You look at the pagan gods and goddesses that people used to worship, and they're very understandable because they're just human beings with superpowers. So that makes sense that when human imagination gets involved, you come up with something that a person could pretty easily imagine. When I look at the Bible and I'm reading this as revelation from God, which is what it is, and it's presenting these ideas, when we put them together, we end up with these doctrines of the Trinity, of the Incarnation, of the hypostatic union of Jesus, the two natures in one person. And we have these ideas that are beyond human imagination. And isn't that what we should expect? That if the God who created everything, including quantum mechanics and general relativity, was to reveal himself to us, that revelation would go beyond what we can actually comprehend. And so to me, this is not even a weakness in our theology. This is actually a strength, that it seems that the real God is revealing himself to us. That's why it goes beyond what we can fully comprehend. And I think that's about all I had to say on that. So we'll cut that off there, if I can ever figure out how to end the show right. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope to be having more of these conversations in the future. I'm pursuing a couple of people, got some ideas going. We'll just see when I get a chance. It may be that the next show comes to you from Cameroon. All right, thanks for watching.